Hi everyone, it's Fee Gordon here coming to you from Singapore today. Up next we have Vince, and he is a data analytics consultant in Minnesota and a 2019 Tableau ambassador. So round of applause for Vince. Woo! His blog and tiny Tableau tips on Twitter have helped encourage people to find new ways to solve old problems, and he has been an active member of the Twin Cities Tableau user group for nearly 4 years. We're welcoming Vince today and look forward to his presentation coming to you right now. So Vince, are you there?
I am. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you fine.
I just want to remind everybody that if you have any questions, feel free to use the Q&A section, and I'll be happy to answer anything that I can hopefully help you out with at the end of it. So once again, hello. I want to start by asking all of you a question. And it's a question that you're undoubtedly familiar with, so don't let any test anxiety creep in or anything. But how would you describe this? Half full, half empty, or maybe your first thought was this. Today I'm going to talk to you about perspective. Not only how we perceive the situation around us, but beyond that, how we can anticipate the perspective of our audience, how we cater our work to best communicate to our audience, and how to most effectively inspire them to action. Now, in his books, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, author Stephen Covey put it this way: 2 people can see the same thing, disagree, and yet both be right. It's not logical, it's psychological. Now, you may find yourself on the half full optimistic side of the glass scenario, or on the half empty pessimistic side, but it's not a binary choice. Perhaps outwardly you project yourself as the half full kind of person, but you worry that deep down inside you feel half empty. If that's the case, it's okay. You're not alone. Now, 2 people, let's call them Jenny and Patty, drive into the same parking lot every Monday through Friday to go to the same job. And while Patty is upset about the health benefits, about the air conditioning, about the office politics, about the commute, Jenny is excited that she gets to have a job. She is thrilled that she gets to pay her bills and that she gets to take her kids on a vacation with the money that she's able to save. You see, what Patty is upset about, Jenny is grateful for. Your outlook determines your outcome. Now, if you'll indulge me, I'd like to tell you a personal story. About 6 years ago, my wife and I had premature twins. And we were nervous and overwhelmed, but we knew that one day at a time we were going to make it work. We were determined to figure this out. And 3 weeks later, I was laid off. And with my wife on maternity leave from a commission-only job, we were facing 0 income with 0 savings and 2 preemies to somehow keep alive. Friends, I was terrified. My job was to provide for my family, and I felt like the rug had been pulled out from underneath me. But with my back against the wall, I realized that I had been given an amazing gift, the freedom to change my outlook. I felt deep down in my gut that my perspective was going to play the biggest part in my outcome. And in being dealt this curveball, I was also given the power to decide how my life and the trajectory of my new family was going to progress. But all it was going to take was the right perspective. Now, at first, I was tempted to think and focus on, well, why did this happen to me? And what could I have done differently to prevent this? Or who was behind the layoff decision? But rather than focus on what had happened in the past, which I couldn't control, I changed my perspective to the future. I searched for the silver lining of my situation. I was grateful that I had been given the time to be where I was needed the most. I was grateful that I had been given a chance that very few new fathers have. I was grateful that I now had the opportunity to reevaluate what empowered me and brought my life meaning. And in addition to learning the skills required to be a stay-at-home parent of twins, being laid off also opened up the opportunity for me to attend grad school and become the first person in my family to earn a master's degree. It catapulted me on a road towards data and visualization and Tableau and towards you, friends. It, along with many other setbacks in my life, afforded me the perspective that I needed to live a life beyond anything I had imagined. It gave me the tools to finally overcome my tendency to overanalyze every decision point in my life. I was always constantly debating when the right time would be to make that move, to take that trip, to start that blog, or to sing that song. The right perspective can change your life. Now, when I'm given a new project at work, the first thing I do before ever even glancing at the data is to decide on what perspective I need to tell the story. Is this a report for a single person, a team of people, the whole organization, or everyone on the internet? Will it be used by an executive or a manager or an analyst or all three? Knowing your target audience is crucial to designing and building a dashboard that resonates. It lets you acknowledge, answer, and anticipate the questions that your end user is going to have. Now, an executive may have very little time to spend with a report, so your perspective must be concise, well aggregated, and honest. Now, you can sometimes afford to be a bit more predictive for this audience. Think like an executive. Project forward and try to anticipate where things are headed. Now, a manager, on the other hand, may have slightly more time to spend with your report, so a perspective with more interactivity that helps answer the why question will be your best bet. Sure, the company is doing great, but what factors are contributing towards that success? Or maybe we fell short of last quarter's predictions, so let's explore why. You can provide more context with this next level of granularity. Now, an analyst may use your report or dashboard to validate the quality of the data at its most granular level and derive insights about patterns and statistical trends in the data. And if there are issues in the data pipeline or opportunities to refine the ETL process or problems with permissions and extract generation, these are the users who will benefit the most from a detailed row-level dashboard. Now, the most effective approach is going to depend on your audience. So the earlier you can determine the right perspective, the more impactful your work will ultimately be. Now, one of the best illustrations that I've seen of this recently is a series that Adam McCann put together called 5 Types of Dashboards. Now, Adam serves as the head of analytics at Kimi and is a 4-time Tableau Zen master. And in this series, he prototypes the same data set in 5 different dashboards, all serving different end user perspectives and answering different questions. Let's take a look. Now, he defined and categorized the various dashboards according to 2 aspects: the level of detail that the end user would most benefit from, and the user type, in other words, the role of the user along a scale from executive to analyst. Now, there's a natural relationship between the two. The executive is more interested in high-level views of the company and various business entities, whereas the analyst is more concerned generally with granular details and the context required to suggest courses of action. So let's consider our new Chief Operations Officer, Roger. Now, his job is to make sure that the ship stays afloat, to be aware of what is happening, where the company is doing good or bad, and when things started to change. Now, this dashboard is ideal for Roger because it doesn't bother with explaining how and why things are the way they are. It just gives him a nice, clean overview. You can glance at it on a regular basis, then get back to golf or whatever it is that executives do. Now, Roger has several subordinates, including Lisa. And Lisa has worked hard to become the general manager of her store, one of several around the city. And one of Lisa's responsibilities is to decide on which products her store has in stock. The company's leadership is testing an idea that perhaps catering each store's inventory specifically to its community will help drive sales. Now, this was Lisa's idea, so she's really committed to seeing it succeed. Now, this type of dashboard is designed to help her answer specific questions so that she can see her idea playing out and hopefully succeeding. And it doesn't bother drilling down into complex issues, but it gives her what she needs without being distracting. Now, one of the departments at Lisa's store focuses exclusively on tables. And this department is run by a guy named Kevin, who is more passionate about tables than anyone you've ever met. Now, he sees his role as not merely to sell tables, but to transport the customer on a journey, a noble quest of valor, justice, and small built-in drawers to hold paper clips. And Kevin knows that when you need a table, you don't need it next week, you need it now. So some things in life cannot wait. And for Kevin, it's tables. Now, this style of dashboard allows Kevin to focus on the metric most important to him, days to ship. Now, he doesn't care much about whether the company is making any money or how many days, or how many other products customers buy. But if somebody needs a table and they need to wait an obscene 4 or 5 days to get it, Kevin needs to know why, and he needs to know now. Now, occasionally, Kevin sends an email to Kathy, the distribution director. And after disregarding the fact that Kevin sent his email as highest possible priority, again, she notes that this is the 6th time this year that Kevin has had issues with his tables taking too long to ship. Now, Kathy is responsible for distribution to all of the stores. And so she uses a dashboard like this, one that lets her see across the entire segment of distribution and identify where bottlenecks may be occurring. And she may be able to identify a downward trend with the distribution center closest to Kevin's store and take corrective action to reroute the tables from the closest alternative. And the scope of this dashboard doesn't extend beyond her responsibility, which is a good thing because it lets her focus her attention and resolve issues much quicker. Now let's talk about Nedry. Now, old Ned is an analyst whose job it is to make sure that the data coming in across all the systems and locations is accurate and up to date. Now, this is a big task. Several systems need to be updated and maintained constantly, and Ned knows that if there's a problem somewhere along the data pipeline, he will be the first person to know. And the avoidance of all catastrophe rests on his capable shoulders, since his work is the foundation upon which all other systems rely. Now, this type of dashboard is usually a map or a scatter plot or a text table. It's often data dense and it requires a lot of real estate on the screen to capture the breadth of information. And Ned uses filters to investigate any issues that might seem out of place, and he has the best understanding of the data at its most granular level. Now, there are many, many other perspectives beyond these 5, but the point is that by taking the time to consider the perspective of your audience, you unlock your ability to communicate most effectively to them. And what's important to one perspective may be completely irrelevant to another, and what conclusions bring joy to one may bring abject terror to another. But before you understand the data, do your best to understand the people, because only then can you capture their interest most effectively. Now, in any type of dashboard or data visualization, you will maximize your impact if you focus on 3 pillars: analysis, design, and storytelling. When any of these pillars are lacking, the visualization may feel incomplete and you risk losing your audience's attention. Now, I'm going to borrow from another Tableau Zen master, Mike Cisneros, who described these pillars like this. At their most basic level, analysis is saying, here's what I found. Design is saying how you make it clear, and storytelling is saying, here's why it matters. Now, we could have a full discussion on each of these, but to bring it into alignment with perspective, remember that people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. Now, another point I've noticed about perspective is that whether I'm designing something for myself or for a client, I've often noticed that the content that makes the final cut comes somewhere around 50 or 60% of the way through the design process. Now, this was a really valuable insight to me because it showed me that the best way for me to create a final draft that I'm really proud of is just to get started in the first place. Even if it's rough, even if it's messy, even, forbid, if it's not perfect. Now, if I start my process knowing that these introductory visualizations may not make the final cut and that is okay, I give myself the freedom to be more creative, to be bolder, and to lay the groundwork for what will make the cut later on. Now, one of the more effective ways that you can entrench yourself in another perspective is to learn to modify your own. And when you understand the power associated with your perspective, you'll be amazed at how much more you can achieve. Now, when I first became active in the Tableau community, I was struck by a false idea that I would never be able to create visualizations like the ones that I was seeing other people publish. Groundbreaking work by designers like Bridget Cogley, Ryan Sleeper, Ann Jackson, Noah Salvatierra, and Kelly Martin intimidated the hell out of me. But then I realized that my perspective was all wrong. I was comparing my skill level with theirs, my beginning with their end. And what I missed at the time was that The right perspective would have also taken time into consideration. You see, the easy route was my first reaction, my skill versus their skill. I'm not as good, so no need to put the work in. But what we don't see is the time that it took those people to get to that skill level. We don't see the dozens of iterations that they may have gone through before that final version. We don't see the late nights, the groggy mornings, the obscene amounts of coffee. We don't see the failures that paved their way to success and greatness. I was there sitting on the sidelines, silently wishing that I could do the things that they could do with such apparent ease. But in the words of Harvey Mackey, the bridge between wishing and accomplishing is discipline. I had to shift my perspective to one that allowed for what I considered to be my failure, that welcomed it as the natural companion to improvement. At the risk of sounding counterintuitive, my road to success was dependent on these failures and setbacks. After all, an arrow can't fly forward unless it's first pulled back. It's a necessary part of the process. You're not defined by these setbacks or shortcomings. You're defined by your ability to adapt and to grow. You're defined by the principles that drive you to give it another shot, to get back up again, and to commit yourself to improving bit by bit, moment by moment. Now, one of the initiatives that I've been driving since last September or so is something that Emily Kund originally monikered Tiny Tableau Tip. Now, I wanted to tell people every so often or so about a tip or a trick that I had picked up in Tableau in case they were new to the tool or had just never known that there was an easier way to do something. But I didn't want to showcase difficult tricks or techniques beyond the capacity of many developers, so I decided to distribute these tips via Twitter, where I will be limited to 280 characters and just a few screenshots. And I figured this would enforce brevity, and I wouldn't be able to ramble on like if I were doing a YouTube tutorial or a podcast or maybe even a speaking engagement at a Tableau Fringe festival. Now, these tiny Tableau tips included things like pressing G while building a dashboard to bring up a grid, or control dragging multiple fields onto the worksheet at once to quickly build a crosstab, or setting your time filters to browse, or using a sum of sales equals running max of the sum of sales calculation to determine which months were record-setting months. Now, the responses to these tiny Tableau tips have been fun and really positive, with a healthy blend of new users learning cool shortcuts as well as seasoned veterans like Josh and Lindsay learning new ways to tackle old challenges. And the cadence of these tips has also encouraged me to be on the constant lookout for new features or things to share. And I've kept a unique perspective on the tool because of the audience that I'm targeting. And it's made me a better developer and a better teacher. Now, perspective is a framework that you are able to manipulate to change the world around you and influence those who interact with the things that you produce. So consider your audience. Consider the questions that keep them up at night. Consider what might be the best way to inspire them. And once you know that, once you know what your audience wants, you can tell them a story that they will never forget. You can build them a dashboard that they will never be able to go without. With the right perspective, you can literally change their life. Now, I want to thank you all for coming. There are a million other things that you could be doing and countless ways that you could have ended up somewhere else, but the sum result of every decision you've made throughout your whole life has led you to this moment right here with me, and I appreciate that. Thank you.
Hey Vince, it's Fee here. I know that my name says Sarah. Great chat, and thank you so much for sharing. It's always a fascinating topic for me around perception. I do actually use perception a lot in trying to help my key stakeholders understand why we might go about things in a different way, for example, using design thinking, etc. So if anyone has any questions for Vince, I'm gonna kick off, but if you can put the questions maybe into chat rather than the Q&A, just because I'm having difficulties accessing into the Q&A on Sarah's computer. Okay. So the question I have for you, Vince, is, when did you get struck by this lightning bolt of, hey, I really need to consider perception in terms of how I go about design? What was that that moment or that realization for you?
I think that anybody who's spent any amount of time in Tableau can always kind of call back to their aha moment, right? That moment where it clicked with them and they realized how much time they could save or how much they could inspire other people. And for me, it came pretty early on in my time with Tableau. I had been working for state government, and we had a few dashboards that had been exactly the same for a long, long, long time. And people were getting so stale with it because it hadn't been designed with a perspective in mind. It had just been put as much onto the dashboard as possible, which meant that nobody got anything out of it. And so I took a totally different approach to it. And I started from scratch and I said, all right, first, what are the questions we're trying to answer, right? Who's going to be using this dashboard? And it was so much more minimal by comparison, but the time to insight was so much faster that I realized that for such a simple approach, like just thinking of it from their perspective, it, one, made my job in design a whole lot easier, and two, was adopted a lot more, and yeah, kind of struck that curiosity and respect and love for data in my end users too, which was a cool thing to be a part of.
Right, absolutely. I mean, I actually saw Bridget Cogley recently shared, I think it was over the last couple of days, there's a really cool tweet out there. Do you remember that dress conversation of whether or not something is gold and white or like a purple and black? Yeah. And people have different perceptions, and they've started to do some studies on it, which is really curious around. It's actually to do with whether or not you're a lark, so you're someone that gets up early in the morning, whereby you get exposed to more daylight, or you're an owl and you stay up late at night, and there's quite a good correlation between the two. And that just fascinates me so much, because when we're thinking about visual design, we see something so clearly, and yet somebody can see something so differently along the way. So what's your top tips for, understanding, different people's perceptions? If you could just list out the thing that I should really think about to take me to the next level.
Yeah, no, one of the questions that I always start with in any new project or team are talking to kind of the end users, the stakeholders. I always start with some variant of the question, what keeps you up at night about the business? Right? Like, what's the thing that drives you nuts more than anything at home when you're not supposed to be thinking about work, and there's that one thing you're always curious about? And if I can start with that, if I can start with the biggest thorn in their side, then I have something that I can just surgically aim for. And if I can start with solving that problem, then everything else just picks up steam from there.
Right.
So yeah.
I mean, I really love that, because that's showing, the empathy that you have for the end user. One of the things I talk to my team about is, it doesn't matter how good our BI products are unless someone actually adopts them and uses them along the way. And so we're really trying to flip that perspective, because as geeks, and I use that word loosely, some people like to be called nerds, techos maybe. As techos, we really love getting stuck into problem solving and understanding what's happening. But at the end of the day, like you say, if you're not solving somebody's problem or taking away that pain of what's keeping them up at night, who cares? It's just another product that's out there and probably won't get adopted along the way. We do have another question for you that's come through on the chat. So is there anything that you learned from doing tiny Tableau tips? Obviously the tips themselves, but anything about Tableau, the community, or along those kind of lines?
Yeah, it's funny for them being tiny Tableau tips. I've learned so much about it, because I always wanted to make sure that as I'm coming up with more tips to share, that I'm not shoehorning all of them into the same category of tips, right? Like I didn't want it to be like every single tip is about how to build a dashboard or about visual design. I try to come at the product from a lot of different directions, and whether that tip is something like if you select a certain group of marks in Tableau and you hit, Control or Command C to copy it, and then you can just paste it into Excel as like a subset. Like, sure, it's not staying within Tableau, but that's a useful thing that a lot of people can use and can make their lives a little bit easier. And so kind of forcing myself to think outside the box like that it's taught me a lot. Anybody who's been a teacher will tell you that you learn more by teaching than you ever do as a student.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's something special about teaching other people as well and helping them along on their journey. So to everyone that's on the conference right now, be sure to give Vince a follow on Twitter. That's at quantum_relic. He's also got a great blog, quantumrelic.wordpress.com. Vince, is there anything else that you would like to share with the TFFers before we close out?
I'm just really, really thankful that this is a thing, that there is something beyond simply the Tableau conference. This is something I look forward to every single time. And the fact that there's several of them throughout the year kind of helps keep that momentum of energy going from conference through to the next conference. And it takes a lot to put it on. And I am very, very thankful to everybody who is a part of that. So thank you guys.